This time, let's try F major. What should I do? I'll start by writing F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Next, because all major scales are built on the pattern whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, I'll write that underneath. Look at your keyboard and answer me. Is it a whole step from F to G? Yes. Is it a whole step from G to A? Yes. Is it a half step from A to B? No. It's a whole step. So now I can't change my A, but I need to move the B closer to the A. How can I move the B closer to the A? Yes, that's right. I can lower it by a half step by adding a flat. Remember, sharps raise the note a half step, and flats lower the note a half step. So I added a flat. Now, from B flat to C, is that a whole step? Yes. C to D, is that a whole step? Yes. D to E, is that a whole step? And from E to F, is that a half step? Yes, it is, because remember, there's no black key between E and F. Okay, let's try a few more. Right now, I'm going to give an example of why it's important to write all the notes out before you begin with your scale. So, let's use the example of C sharp major. If you look at your keyboard and you remember you need a whole step, hopefully you would come up with D sharp next. Now you need another whole step. Many times it's very common for students to look at the next note and going from D sharp, think of a whole step as being F. Because if you look at your piano keyboard, the note that's a whole step above D sharp is the note you would normally call F. However, if I've written out all my notes in advance, then I'll realize that I can't go from a D to an F because I would be skipping the letter E. So it has to be some kind of E. It has to be an E, but it has to land on the note that we normally call F. How would we write an E that would be enharmonic, meaning it would sound the same as F? You'd write an E sharp. So, just because something is not a black key doesn't mean that it can't sometimes be a sharp or flat. In the case of E and F, there's no black key in between them. So if we need to raise E, we have to make it into an E sharp, and it's enharmonic. Enharmonic is a word that means it sounds the same, but is written differently. It's enharmonic with F. The same would be true with B sharp, or C flat, which would sound like B, or F flat, which would sound like E. So that's why it's really important to remember that you have to have one of every letter in the alphabet. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes students think it's kind of arbitrary, but one reason is that if you were reading some music, you really only want to have one kind of E in the music. Otherwise, you'd constantly have to have E sharp followed by E natural. Oh, do you know what a natural sign looks like? I bet you don't. That right there is a natural sign. Actually, you probably read about it in the textbook already. But if I had two kinds of F, for example, an F and an F sharp in my scale, every time I wanted to go from an F sharp to a regular F, I would have to put a natural sign next to it. So in my music, if I had two kinds of F in the song or the piece of music, then I would have all kinds of sharps and naturals all over the place. So that's why we just have one kind of each note so that we can be consistent, and later when we have key signatures, you'll learn about those, and it's so that we only put one kind of accidental on a note in a key signature. It would be very confusing otherwise. Continue with our C sharp major scale. Next, what do we need? A half step. So what's a half step above E sharp? It's going to be F sharp. Remember, our E sharp was enharmonic with F, and a half step above F would have been F sharp. So it's F sharp. So far we have whole, whole, half. What's next? Whole. And what's a whole step above F sharp? G sharp. Then we need another whole step, right? What's a whole step above G sharp? A sharp. Whole step. And what's a whole step above A sharp? Hopefully you said B sharp. I imagine some of you might have said C. It's the same situation we had with the E sharp. It's going to be a B sharp. And finally we need a half step. This reminds me of a few pointers to keep in mind. One very important thing to keep in mind is when you're writing a scale, you always want to end on the same note you started with. See, we started on a C sharp, and we ended on a C sharp. If you write a scale, and then you find that you don't end on the same note you began with, then you know that you've made an error. So always make sure that your scale begins and ends on the same note. My second tip pertains to this scale in particular, C sharp, and also C flat. You already know C major doesn't have any sharps or flats. So these scales, C sharp and C flat, should be very easy, because with C sharp, every note is raised half step from C, natural, major. So every single note is going to have a sharp, and in C flat, all the notes are going to be flat, right? Because you just took all those notes and added a flat next to them. So the scales, the major scales starting on C, are very simple. Another tip to remember is that with major scales, this isn't true of all scales, but with major scales, you will never have sharps and flats in the same scale. So when you're making a major scale, if you have a sharp, you shouldn't have a flat later in the scale. And if you have a flat, you shouldn't have a sharp later in the scale.